Greetings and welcome to the Pandemic Podcast with me, Dan Astin-Gregory. Access denied. Welcome to the brave new world. In tonight's episode, I'm going to be talking about the vaccine passport situation in the United Kingdom and across Europe. Apologies if you're expecting to see Beverly Turner tonight talking about the childhood vaccination legal case. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, we've had to postpone that interview, but we have locked in a new date and we will be back very soon. So apologies for the late notice on that one. But I take the time tonight to bring up this important issue and help raise your awareness of some of the campaigns that are happening to challenge vaccine passports. You'll notice as well tonight I'm in a different location. I'm down in Cornwall for my wife's my father-in-law's birthday tomorrow. So I'm calling in from a location talking about the brave new world that we are now facing. So as part of this, I will be showing you some of the news headlines that we've seen across Scotland, Italy, and bringing you up to date on some of the proceedings in the Britain around vaccine passports. So if you've been living under a rock for the last 12 months, you may not be aware of what the vaccine passports are all about. But essentially, this digital certification system will be able to discriminate based upon your medical history. So no longer your medical records private. Your employer, the venues around you may end up asking you for your immunization status in order to access society, goods and services, or even employment. Quite clearly, this is a very discriminatory policy that will widen the inequalities in society, but nonetheless, hey-ho, here we are entering into the brave new world. So I'm going to bring up some articles to show you what's happening in different places around Europe. Firstly, Scotland has consented to deploy the vaccine passports. In fact, they will go live tomorrow in Scotland. So here we have on the Scotsman website through the scenarios whereby these vaccine passports will become mandatory from tomorrow. Any live indoor unseated events of more than 500 people, live outdoor unseated events of more than 4,000 people, and events of more than 10,000 people, including football matches. Now, bear in mind, already it's been quite clearly shown the outdoor transmission is essentially, of COVID specifically, is essentially zero, negligible in worst case scenario. So to use vaccine passports for outdoor events is completely futile. And entirely needless. And also, when it comes to the vaccines themselves, we know that they don't prevent infections or transmission. So even in indoor events, using creating vaccine-only venues is essentially creating a honeypot of infections for the vaccinated. So as we go through this, I think the only benefit that will come from a skeptical point of view from vaccine passports is it will quickly show that they're a completely pointless activity as people continue to get infected. And this time, if you create vaccine-only venues, you won't be able to blame it on the unvaccinated, which has been a ploy so far in order to try and coerce people to get vaccinated. So essentially, the world is developing these honeypots of infections. We've seen it in some of the early trials. There's a huge hoo-ha about the use of vaccine passports in Boardmasters Festival, where countless people allegedly got infected, quite clearly invalidating the use. And also some of the trials that has already happened with indoor events has shown that it's almost in a completely ineffective mechanism of reducing infections. But we know, those of you who are, like me, have a skeptical and critical mind, know that this is not really about managing infections. This is about the gateway to digital IDs and everything else that follows. But it still sounds like a conspiracy to most, but just take 10 minutes of your time to Google the trends in the world of digital identity and see where they've been going for the last 5 years. There's certainly no conspiracy there. It's all in black and white. So in Scotland, here's what's happening. The vaccine passports are starting tomorrow, which will require proof of immunization upwards. And again, all the controversy around the childhood vaccinations, 12 to 15-year-olds. This is really another way to coerce your children to get vaccinated. And many of the reports about the vaccine passports are quite blatant in the fact that it's clearly not about reducing infections. It's really about driving up the vaccine uptake, which I have real issues with. How society has come from a place of accepting that they may have merit if they were effective and safe to limit the risk to those who are vulnerable. But we've gone from that to now trying to vaccinate every living soul. And, I was formally fact-checked for my assertions around that. But again, just search quite clearly. Pfizer are trialing the product from 6 months old. It's very clear where this campaign is going in terms of the vaccinations, and vaccine passports in the first instance are being used to drive the uptake of vaccination. Now, one of the things here around the vaccination campaign is that it's clearly been deemed a social good or a common good by the authorities, the centralized power systems, and the elites. And like many common goods that we see that become moralized in the public eye, many of them seem to serve to increase the profits of the very companies that are employing the products or the sort in question. We live in a world now of what's called creative capitalism. Bill Gates calls creative capitalism, which is a smart way of deceiving people into believing that what they're doing is for the social good, but all it seems to serve to do is enrich the pockets of the elites that stand to gain from these things. But we all know that's how the world works. It's just how we deal with it, because it's the veil of the common good is now being used to really take the tainted image of capitalism into a new realm. But nonetheless, I digress. I'm feeling that way today. Ultra skeptic Dan is out in force. So here we are in Scotland. Apologies to any of you living in Scotland that you are now subjected to this illiberal approach, completely needless and illiberal approach. As I mentioned, these are the locations that you'll now be forced to use them. And if you're unvaccinated, it seems that you'll be excluded from these particular events, irrespective of the fact previously infected and therefore likely to be immune, or simply just infected, because under this current regime that we're operated under, we live in a world where people are presumed sick until proven healthy. I talked with some colleagues just yesterday how much time we've spent in the last 18 months being completely, those of us who have been completely healthy, prevented from spending time through lockdowns with other completely healthy people on the assumption that we are sick, despite the fact that we are not. And this mentality is the new driving culture of the world that we live in. Not only that, the idea that asymptomatic transmission is a driver. Well, it's interesting because asymptomatic transmission, despite the vast amount of evidence suggests it plays a negligible role, even pre-symptomatic transmission seems to play a very negligible role too, although it's possible. It seems that the vaccination campaign has created conditions where now asymptomatic transmission may play a role, given that it's almost therapeutic effect rather than sterilizing effect as a product. So the vaccinated may well be infected and showing lower symptoms, no symptoms, and therefore in these honeypot environments transmitting the virus freely, putting other people at risk. But nonetheless, these vaccine passports are still coming forward despite that completely flawed approach. Now, again, there's mixed evidence on that, because, again, there is other evidence that suggests that the vaccinated are now experiencing more severe forms of COVID as opposed to asymptomatic. The jury's out top on the efficacy of the products when it comes to infections, and long term time will tell if the vaccines themselves actually do reduce severe disease and mortality. Many of the measures that have evaluated the effectiveness so far have come during periods spring or summertime, and sadly time will tell as we go into winter. Is really out on the long-term effectiveness. But regardless of my skepticism of the efficacy and safety, I still truly hope that they are effective for those who have taken them, because that includes friends and family, and obviously for the good of society. We want people to avoid harm. And my whole mission throughout this last 18 months is about minimizing total harm. But we digress. So vaccine passports in Scotland compulsory from 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. But there's going to be a 2-week grace period for businesses in terms of enforcement, meaning that the businesses have got 2 weeks to get the house in order to put these things in place. And from then, up until then, they won't face any punishment from the Scottish government, like naughty children for not enforcing the vaccine. Now, moving forward, there was a little challenge put forward by a group in Scotland, but the judge, of course, none of the judges in any of the British courts are taking any of these challenges. It's quite clearly they're under the thumb of the powers that be that deploy these things. None of the courts have got a blind bit of interest in justice. They've refused to delay the Scottish vaccine passport scheme, which will continue as planned, despite the delay in terms of enforcement. Those carrying forward the legal challenge are continuing to fight the fight, and the game is not up yet. And I think what we'll see across the world is more legal cases trying to challenge these policies, because we are on the precipice of that brave new world where we've got a 2-tier society, vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And any time in history we've witnessed society segregated or stratified based upon any human characteristic, it really has not gone well. But I will talk about the consequences of this as we go through this, and talk about some of the things that can be done to try and resist what's happening from a public point of view, and also what can be done creatively. Because ultimately, if you are choosing not to get vaccinated or not able to get vaccinated, then your access to society is unfortunately legally being restricted. Therefore, we need to think about how we can actually begin to create parallel systems. That's the reality that we're now facing, are not excluded from day-to-day life. So Sturgeon, Scotland, faces a vaccine passport judicial review. Legal action is continuing despite the initial refusal to recognise the case. But again, it seems the courts have bought and sold and simply on board with this new brave new world of tyranny, which to me begs the question of what does the future of the legal system look like if what simply are the puppets of the government and the global elites. Nonetheless, we continue to discuss this. Here's another story from across Italy. Italy makes vaccine passport compulsory, where workers can now be fined and suspended without pay if they do not comply with COVID green pass that they've deployed in Italy. The law applies to both public and private employees from the 15th of October, having the Italian government approve these measures. Nothing like this has been done in Europe. Italy is putting themselves at the forefront of this internationally, the forefront of tyranny internationally. That's not something to be proud of, really, is it? But nonetheless, this is the way the world is going. Despite parties being split on the issue, this is now moving forward in the UK, and I'll move on to talk about this further from this CNBC article, where COVID passports are mandatory for all employees. It's the first country to make it mandatory for all workers, as countries are taking a stronger effort to boost inoculation rates. Quite clearly here in black and white, this is not about minimizing risk, it's about boosting inoculation rates. If you look at outside of the world of science, if you take your attention to a lot of the market information, just astronomical profits being made by pharmaceutical industries, astronomical profits being made by investors in that space. To be honest, forgive me for saying this, but this morning I was thinking, should we all be looking to profit from the downside? Should we all be looking to make a packet out of this travesty and reinvesting the funds in a new society? Or in fact, should we just be looking to persuade investors in pharmaceutical companies to pull out from this unethical play and watch the stock prices plummet? My view, that's probably the latter is probably a more favourable option. But from any Italian worker that fails to present a certificate will face suspension They could have their pay stopped after 5 days. They can't be fired, but if you're not paid, you may as well be fired. So this is the world that we're walking into now, where we are entering into a paper society. In France, 3,000 health workers have been suspended to get vaccinated. In New York, 70,000 workers face losing their job at a time where the health really suffering. And so you ask yourself, is this really about public health? Is this really about safety? No, quite clearly not. Italy, continued stories here. Italy expands using pass, eyeing an even broader mandate, essentially looking to extend it to curtail citizens' movements and activity based upon vaccine status. It's quite deplorable, the world we're entering right here. This is essentially an iron curtain coming down on your choice when it comes to your bodily autonomy. Today, it's a COVID vaccine. Tomorrow, what else could it be? The flu vaccine or any other choice that the elites, the governments decide is worthy. Just take a look at China in terms of the social credit system that's extended from this type of activity. Whatever the public, the governments and the global elite decide is a common good could be factored into your digital ID and your behavior is judged. And unfortunately, we live in a world where this type of mentality is almost promoted. Social media has created a world where people's own self-esteem is based upon how many likes they get. We live in a culture where people get more value from virtue signaling than virtue itself. So we have the conditions within society where these types of approaches are now being embraced. I can see a generation of people who would be in favor of a social credit system because it's another means of them signaling their virtue through their behaviors, getting points, getting credits for their behavior. Yet it's the state and the big business that decide what is virtuous, and all the while increasing their profits. But bottom line, from this behavior, it's quite frightening the trajectory we're on, not only from a digital ID perspective, but from a cultural and societal point of view. Bringing us back to the UK, the UK government is looking to sign to be joining forces with the EU COVID vaccine passport scheme, integrating the UK's jab database into the EU bloc, quite clearly signalling British intent to pursue this. Now, this is relating to the international vaccine passport scheme, but in doing so, it would enable government to quickly launch a domestic vaccine passport scheme as it desires. Now, this is now at a late stage. Significant process has been made on a technical process as it's understood, and it's a gateway through which different countries' vaccine certificates and test results can be scanned and verified across nations. This is a signal of where the world is heading. This is really a quite clear signal of the future that we face. For those of us who value freedom and live in a society where our papers are not checked to accent products and services, this should send shivers down your spine in terms of the world that we're now facing, this dystopian brave new world. If you watch Black Mirror, there's an episode on this type of culture that we're about to sleepwalk into. Next up, what are the European countries doing? There's an article in Guardian which talks about the countries that are using them: Austria, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, Slovenia, among the EU countries who have introduced some form of COVID pass. Others have tried and failed. In Spain, the regional governments of the Canaries, Galicia, Cantabria, and Andalusia wanted to introduce them, but were denied by respective high courts. At least there are some courts in the world that aren't corrupt. At Spain's Central High Court. Countries such as Sweden, surprise, surprise, allowing countries to enter easily and not requiring it to access society, saying they prefer to open up everyone at the same time. Sweden, the last bastion of a liberal society. Denmark introduced them and now suspended them, saying they're no longer needed, so that they are. It looks like they are no longer carrying ahead, which shows some hope that perhaps there is some sense once deployed that quite clearly dysfunctional. But clearly the mentality in the world is these things are going to be required. In the UK, the UK has now launched a third public consultation. You can see on the screen here is the the COVID-19 response autumn and winter plan, where the HM government has outlined its winter plan B/plan A. It's just a way of phasing in these things, all contingent upon the NHS, the crown jewel of our liberties. We know that the NHS is going to be under pressure. I've covered that previously extensively on the podcast. Going to be under pressure this winter, which will just give the government once again the scapegoat to introduce whatever it wishes into society, whatever draconian measures. So within this Plan B document, it does set out the government's intent to make vaccine passports mandatory. And here we have the rationale, the proposal issued on the 27th of September, talking about the mandates for vaccine certification. It talks about the status certificate review report, which I'll show you here. We're not going to go this in depth, but it's 16 pages, basically hamming up the need for a vaccine passport. I know thousands of people sent in contrary evidence to none of this, but to this report, all completely contrary. None of it mentioned in here. None of the societal concerns outlined in any due course here. Completely as though it's just been written as a sales pitch by the government. I've lost total faith in any of these petitions that come from the government perspective. Earlier on this year, 375,000 people signed a petition to say, do not roll out COVID vaccine, do not roll out vaccine passports. Probably one of the most signed passports in recent history. Quite clearly, the government has no intent on listening to the British public. But here we are, a third public consultation for their Plan B, once again, which will result in all the evidence that the government wants to put forward to deploy this. But nonetheless, I encourage you, irrespective of this, there is any merit in doing this, to fill out this woeful survey, woeful on the basis that, as you'll see when you go through the questions, it basically is skewed like a classic YouGov poll, skewed to the actual response that the government wants to face. But nonetheless, I encourage you to go ahead and fill out this government consultation. You can respond here online. If you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, you'll see the link to this consultation within the text of this video. So I encourage you that. Now, there's two things you can do. Firstly, please make sure that you sign the Together Declaration, the togetherdeclaration.org. This is a currently UK-focused campaign which strongly rejects vaccine passports or any similar form of medical certification in the United Kingdom. You'll see that it's very close to, I've got the latest figures, it's very close to 100,000 signatures now. Please add your name to that. This is an important campaign. This is likely to be expanded internationally, but right now it's present in the UK. Please add your signature to this. And then whatever you do, make sure you respond to this government consultation and give your evidence against vaccine passports. And again, the links to both of those are in the text and the description to this series of documents. So we're on the precipice of a brave new world. This is an incredibly dystopian time. I am fearful for the future that we are facing. But ultimately, the unvaccinated, those who choose not to be vaccinated or those who cannot be vaccinated, risk being excluded from society, from entertainment, from products and services, and even employment. So regardless of what happens here, if you watch my episode with Matthias Desmet, he talked about how a totalitarian state, an authoritarian state, will often poison itself. It will come to its own natural end. And these more draconian approaches that we're seeing, where we're seeing vast amounts of people excluded from society, creating honeypots for infection, for me, it's on the pathway to its own self-sabotage. So in some ways, whilst I deplore what's happening, I feel in some ways it's going to be part of the nail in the coffin to this draconian totalitarian regime that we're seeing. But I think more will come. It's going to follow with booster after booster after booster. People are going to get more and more sick. These bizarre headlines that we're seeing in the newspapers, we're saying there's this mystery rise in heart disease and heart attacks. It's not a mystery, is it? Let's be quite frank. This will start to unravel itself, sadly, despite all the warnings that people like you and I have put forward into the world. It just seems like it almost needs to run its course. But in preparation for that, we must mentally, emotionally, and spiritually and practically prepare for this brave new world. It's quite evident that parallel societies are going to emerge, localized communities that are non-compliant. This is the greatest fight for freedom that we have seen in the modern world. We are living in a world that are going to be discriminated against based upon choices in this coercive regime. So it's important that we start to look at, back in the day, the speakeasy bars. These things are going to become a reality. Underground raves. This is all going to start to happen. An underground parallel society is necessary. We need to start thinking about that. It's these things are happening. There'll always be workarounds, but it's important that we get creative now, because there are still millions and millions of people in every country in the world who will not get vaccinated or cannot get vaccinated. So there is enough of us to come together to build parallel societies, and even look at, like I've seen in Denmark with Christenhaven, where entire new legal jurisdictions come to emerge. This is a long-term pathway to change, and believe me, history shows us that there will be a pushback, there will be a rebellion, there will be a revolt, and that time is coming. And as the further that these draconian, authoritarian, totalitarian leaders continue to push us into this dystopian, brave new world, the stronger the pushback will be, the faster it will come. So in many ways, these sad realities that we're now facing often lead me to believe that it will be the beginning of the demise of these authoritarian regimes. But nonetheless, we must prepare. We must prepare. This is going to be a difficult winter for many reasons. And for those of us, I myself have been infected with COVID. I had COVID previously, symptomatic COVID. I was ill for 10 to 14 days, which leads me to believe that myself and my wife, who was also sick with it, and even my baby boy, who Lizzie was pregnant, 36 weeks pregnant when she had the virus, he's likely to be immune. We have natural immunity, which we know is superior to any form of vaccination. Yet here I am, like thousands and millions of us who have natural immunity from exposure to virus, or from pre-immunity, or just a strong immune system, that are going to be excluded from society. There's your friends and family that you won't be able to join on holiday, or to the bar, or to the event, the gig, the concert, the music event, the sporting event. This is the world we're about to create. But now it's down to us to change that. Civil unrest is undoubtedly going to rise. There will be a revolt, there will be a pushback, but in the meantime, let's make sure we look after each other. Let's make sure that we don't. Let's make sure we start to build parallel systems where we don't exclude anyone. Let's not become a mirror of the crazy world that we are facing. Let's create a world which is open for all. Let's create that better. Let's create better opportunities for people, so that we draw people away from this dark, fear-based, scarcity-driven dystopian reality that has been presented to us. So once again, apology if you're expecting Bev Turner tonight. You've just got me random raving, particularly critical, particularly skeptical tonight about the crazy, brave new world that we're facing. But believe me, it's important that we continue to take action. So please, if you're based in the United Kingdom, sign the Together Declaration. Do take part in that public consultation, and watch out for the movement that is forming that will push back against this crazy world that we are currently facing. So good night for now. The last thing I'll encourage you to do, if you haven't done so already, I've been broadcasting now straight for over 12 months, over 300 episodes. Spend every day of my waking hour of my life trying to figure out how we can communicate about the issues that we're facing, bringing on guests that can help expand the message, and looking at how I can participate in campaigns and bring people together so we can collaborate together to overcome this. So please just take a moment of your time. If you haven't done so already, just join the mailing list. It'll take 1 minute of your time to go to danjgregory.com/pandemic. Just put your name and email. We've got a secure server. We won't spam you. We just send you information about the content and campaigns that we're involved in, our future plans. So just take a moment to do that, please, so we can remain in touch, because more and more that we enter this dystopian world, the more censorship we're going to see. YouTube has just published new rules, which basically rules out any critical. You can't say anything critical or ask any questions about vaccines. It's pretty much banned now. We don't need the online harms bill, because YouTube has basically drawn down that iron hammer, saying you will not criticize vaccines. You will not say anything that could discourage anyone. We live in this crazy, crazy, crazy world when people around us, I heard sadly in the last week, 3 young people under 18 losing their lives following the vaccine. We can't talk about it. It's absolutely insane. And I don't want my young boy who's in that other room, just ahead of me, you may have just heard him crying. I'm going to go and tend to him in a moment. I help Lizzie out. He is not going to grow up in a world on my watch where he has less rights, freedoms, and opportunities than I've had. And it's down to us, the parents, those of us who are brave enough to say no to this tyranny, to say no to this dystopia, and continue to move forward and forge a better world. It's down to us. It's in our hands. It's down to us to have the courage to build a better reality. And believe me, when we come together, that is exactly what we will do. So I'll say good night to you for now. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've seen in a few of you been trying to get in touch since I've been on paternity leave. I've had over 3,000 emails, over 5,000 messages on Facebook. So please just bear with me. I've got a team who are rallying around me to try and help respond to your kind comments and your emails. But we've got a backlog. And meanwhile, I'm spending every hour trying to pull things together, working with the different test groups, campaign groups, to see if we can work together to overcome these things. So we've all got to play our part. As I say, we don't need heroes. The only heroes we need is looking us in the mirror. It's you and I. So stare yourself in the mirror tonight and remind yourself that you are the leader that will help us build a new and better reality. So good night for you to now. Have a lovely evening, and I'll see you again very soon.